and we're really happy to have her join us. Jeanna has recently completed our Organization Design Certificate program, and during that process, we learned a lot about the really interesting work that she's doing there. I will also be spending 2 minutes talking, and then Chris Worley will be talking about the relationship of incubators to innovation overall, and what some of the key issues are in getting an incubator up and running, and then turn it over to Jeanna, who will go through the case. We've decided among us that we're going to have some conversation during the case because there's some interesting points partway through that we wanted to draw attention to and maybe put into some larger perspective. So this is part of and related to work that Chris and I and the Center for Effective Organizations has been doing around designing organizations for the digital world. And what we've really learned by working with lots of companies is that there's really 3 major purposes of digitization. One is the efficiency piece, carrying out work processes and coordination. Of course, companies have been doing that for a long time but are still in the process of putting it in place. And then there is the how do you get to your markets more effectively and increase your revenues, and that's all the digital marketing and e-commerce, in addition to different kinds of connections to customers who become part of the work process of the organization, and then changing business models, which is really increasing the value that's delivered through various kinds of connections that are now possible. All 3 of those areas involve a lot of innovation, some more fundamental than others, but a lot of innovation nonetheless. And this has led companies to really struggle with how do we do this much innovation at the same time, and how do we get our core organization to be able to incorporate that much innovation in a relatively rapid time. And the rapidity is really brought on by the fact that if you don't do it, you're likely to be disrupted by those who can do it. And so a lot of companies are seeing this as a survival issue for themselves. The other piece that we wanted to mention that is really critical to this is that we can't treat this as a technology play. The technical system is indeed a part of it, and it's for good reason that a lot of resources are being put into developing these new technical capabilities, these platforms, artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, and so forth. However, the social system gets pretty severely disrupted by the implementation of all these technologies and needs to be, to a great extent, redesigned if you're going to take complete advantage of the new technical capabilities. And the thing that really links the technical and the social is the work design of the organization. The way work is done, who does what, how work is coordinated and connected, and how it's governed really do need to change pretty fundamentally if you're going to take advantage of things like decentralization of information and the ability to make decisions in a distributed manner and move away from the top-down hierarchical direction of the old world. So we've been studying organizations that are going through that and just thought that the incubation piece of it was pretty interesting, and a lot of companies are trying to make it work, having some difficulty, and I think Humana and Jeanna have gone about it in a pretty systematic way. One of the other things that we found and that Jeanna's going to hit on and you should listen to is the need to change not just the structure of the organization, but the full system. And here we return to our old favorite, the STAR model. Those of you who are on are likely to have used the STAR model and be very familiar with it. But we are indeed finding that organizations have to not only restructure how they're set up to do work, but they have to deal with all the elements of the organizational system. And here I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who's going to talk a little bit about how this fits in with organizational agility and ambidexterity and why it's so important. Chris?
Thanks, Sue. Welcome, everybody. Throw my 2 cents in terms of welcoming everybody, and of course thanking Jeanna for sharing her experience. Like Sue said, as part of the org design certificate, we got a chance to sort of dig into this project quite a bit, and we thought it was just a really cool example of the digitization process. And for my part, I wanted to kind of link us back to the notions of a little bit of the notions of agility. Obviously, we're going to try and link it to notions of organizational ambidexterity. And just as a reminder, what we're seeing organizations do, and I think Sue began to highlight that at the beginning with this whole digital trend. What we're seeing is that the technology is sort of forcing organizations to face these complex tensions or polarities, right? And having to sort of address mutually conflicting demands. In this case, the demand for innovation and change and transformation brought on by digitalization, at the same time that they got to run the business and healthcare delivery and doing all the things that the organization needs to do to keep the lights on and things like that. And for those of you who were part of the first design class, the little chart in the lower left here should look vaguely familiar. And what we notice in organization ambidexterity, and one of the things I think Jeanna's presentation really shows nicely, is this idea about context and connection. In other words, what I think she's going to talk about, one of the things I think you're going to hear, and I think we should sort of talk about it when we get to that point, is the notion that the senior executive team must be on board with this. They must understand that there's this tension and polarity existing inside the organization to create the new on the one hand and maintain the core on the other. So they have to be in a really clear position to understand and support both of those pieces of work, and that's why I think Sue's point about work design is so crucial, because two different kinds of work are going on inside the organization. They have to be structured differently, and so the senior team has to be able to balance that. At the same time, there's got to be a connection. We know that absent the connection between the new and the core, that organizations sort of end up with the not invented here syndrome, where the new and the innovative exists distinct from the organization, and the core doesn't see the relevance of it, or maybe sees it, at worst, sees it as a threat. So the notion of having some kind of a connection, and again, one of the reasons Sue and I were so excited about this case was the extent to which Jeanna has been quite deliberate about designing a connection between the core and the new, been quite deliberate about pulling that executive team together and saying, you guys got to be on board to support this. And if you think about what on the content side, what's the new? What's happening over on the new side? And Jeanna's going to talk a lot about the different initiatives and projects that were going on inside the organization. They were little tests and pilots and experiments about new ways of doing things. They were different capabilities that were being considered and discussed and incubated inside the organization. There's all kinds of process innovation and new business models and new businesses that are being considered. And again, as Sue sort of began the seminar talking about how digitalization enables all this stuff, well, as digitalization enables all this stuff, it has to get brought on and integrated with the core. So I think the case here at Humana really gives us a good chance to sort of see this model in action and listen to how Jeanna sort of pulled this together and got it up and running inside the organization. So from time to time, as Sue mentioned, what we want to do is sort of call time out and come back to this model and demonstrate how we think it's a great case of ambidexterity and agility in the context of digitalization. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our guest and let her sort of give you some grounded descriptions of the work that she was doing at Humana. And Jeanna, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to review and discuss this work. I thought it'd be helpful if we start with a short background about the company, because everyone might not be familiar, and the strategy, of course, to provide context before we review the design process, and then we'll talk about that and, of course, leave time for discussion at the end, as well as pausing along the way, as Chris and Sue mentioned, to connect the things that that they've been working on with this. Here, flip the page. Okay, so Humana is over 50 years old, began as an operator of nursing homes back in the 1960s. It expanded to include healthcare plans, most of which are Medicare Advantage or supplements to the federal Medicare benefits. It's a federal U.S. program. There's a smaller portion of business and specialty plans, such as dental and vision and small employer group business. And this company also provides state-based Medicaid services in many states and administers the U.S. military health program called TRICARE in 2 of the 3 regions. In addition to these products, there's a large set of services designed to improve the healthcare experience and associated costs via better clinical applications and utilization. Utilization means the use of services, which you actually do. So these services include pharmacy, home health, wellness, and population health programs, and services for healthcare providers, which could be doctors or facilities or care coordinators or therapists or various healthcare support services. It's a broad group. So customers could be healthcare providers, they could be, or traditional consumers, most of which would be Medicare eligible, which is age 65 and up, or other healthcare systems. So the summary of the environment in which we're working, Medicare Advantage and supplement plans build on Medicare. So there's necessarily a very close alignment with the administrative agency CMS around how to enable people to reach their best health while effectively managing public funds. So challenges are numerous, as you may expect. Behavioral and lifestyle circumstances and choices have a significant impact on health. The systemic challenges include advances in care outpacing the funding model. So consider, for example, the number of devices and drugs that have become available in just the last decade. The other systemic challenges are around the traditional payment model, which was transactional or fee-for-service. So, for example, a doctor is paid for each checkup during a pregnancy rather than the entire delivery. Same thing for something like a hip replacement. It's pretty predictable, but it's still transactional on how it's executed for the most part. The transactional payment models are not consistently connected over the providers, facilities, and payers, and not surprisingly, benefits design, which is deductibles and co-pays and coverage, have been skewed towards transactions as well. So these disconnects can be exasperating when you're healthy and even more so when you're not. Any questions about the company before I talk about the strategy? Okay.
I don't have any questions, but I do want to sort of point out, how complex this darn thing is. I mean, once you enter the world of healthcare, you enter into a whole world of language, regulation, technology change. I mean, I think just that short introduction gives everybody a pretty good idea of the complexity with which this case is sort of unfolding, within which this case is unfolding. So it really is an amazingly complex industry.
And that's a nice segue into the point about the strategy. There's actually 2 shifts needed here. So one is a product shift in a way that enables a focus on a whole person, whole health, and achieving health outcomes. The other one is technological to meet consumer expectations for connection. And in this case, insurance is a risk-based product that you'd purchase in a transaction. The likely future is a more holistic product set with many deep connections, and the health plan product would become part of another product that might include telehealth options, health programs, Alexa applications, Fitbits, and those sort of things. So connecting is paramount, and so is being able to read the environment and adapt more quickly, because the product cycles will be significantly more compressed. Enabling the shift is going to require connecting data that has never been connected before, that didn't even need to be connected before, and also building a different leadership model to lead a collaborative network, alongside a traditional hierarchy. So the need for this technology change and product change was obvious to everyone. It's a successful company full of very smart people. And as just noted, the pieces to deliver healthcare are there. I mean, there are lots of different services and products. So there were actually a potpourri of things in play when we started this. A platform business unit had made significant progress in improving the efficiency of managing medical records and payments, as well as providing the foundation for clinical insights that enabled better care and outcomes outcomes for literally millions of people. There were also several digital products in play, such as telehealth, where you'd talk to your doctor on your phone, remote patient monitoring, which is an extension of telehealth. It's where you could send your blood pressure data or glucose tests or something like that to healthcare providers. However, these things in isolation were improvements on the existing model, not really a new model. The true transformation in this context enables the care experience in addition to the Humana relationship with the provider and the Humana relationship with the consumer. It's the bottom line of that triangle there. And that necessitates the integration of all the separate things, the digital products with the care delivery with the platform. Any questions about the strategy? Otherwise, I'll start talking about the process. Okay. So with a strategy around integration in place of these elements, the next set of work was how. And so what we did is we went slow to be able to go fast. So the first decision was exactly what Chris just talked about. We called it a dual transformation, ambidexterity. It means a new business of some sort with the expectation that it would work back to transform the existing core and that existing potpourri would come together. The next work was developing a strategy to inform the top line of the new organization and the leader selection for these new units, and a plan to align all of this, the new business and the existing pieces. The important points to keep in mind here are the notion of having the startup or the incubator is great. It is, however, more than simply standing up a new unit. You have to change everything, and also that the design is iterative. So the initial work here was the top line leader level and new business units and the pieces to integrate. So the design criteria for the new business units and the core transformation focused on the earlier point around enabling the provider-patient relationship as a brand differentiator and on acceleration of these existing efforts via integration of the platform and digital products and delivery. And also specifically address the cultural shift needed, the need to change how we work as well as what we do. That was to Sue's point around the operating model, it being a totally changed business model. The very specific need in this case is, in this particular case, it'll be different for different organizations, is really building learning capability. This isn't a core strength. Learning in insurance is understanding sales and underwriting, and learning in digital products is experimentation and iteration.
Hey, Jeanna, you mentioned as you were talking about the process, you mentioned the idea of going slow to go fast. Did you get any pushback on that? Was that pretty well accepted? Was everybody comfortable with that, or was there some pressure to sort of move quicker?
It varies. So some people, and I think that's always the case. Some people want to take time and think about it, and then other people want to go more quickly. So the answer to the simple answer is both. And so what I think was effective there, though, was to just stay constant. There were meetings every 2 or 3 weeks, and if you didn't get, sometimes you didn't get anything done, but then you go to the next one and you pick the topic back up and bring in more information. The thing that was a big win there was the alignment around what you called ambidexterity and what we call dual transformation. So once that alignment was in place, then things went more quickly. But the speed varies.
Cool. No, good point. Yeah.
So the approach for the dual transformation or ambidexterity was 2 new business units. Now, this is the center and the right on this diagram. So the center one brings all the existing pieces together into an existing platform. And those are the capabilities that we believe that we needed. And then the one on the right is the new business unit or the incubator. The latter, the incubator, is designed as a startup business, and its product is ideas, and its customers are small, around maybe up to 10,000, where Humana has 21 million members, so it's a small piece. In various subsets of markets, not the entire country. So they work in partnership with the platform group, which is then tasked with scaling successful innovations to millions of consumers. So the platform does the specific product design, development, and management, as well as drive the products into the core business and take lessons back. The core business is also providing insight to innovation, as well as a feedback loop for implemented products. So if there was room on here, a triangle might be a better depiction. There's specific work defined in the core all the existing business units to specifically implement these products. And another thing that I find helpful in thinking about this is to think of the platforms in levels. So any platform you see, and this one included, the way it's depicted, is a micro market. It's really an organized exchange. It'll have, it has producers of products, or it'll match services, but it's going to build on another platform. So it's actually building on traditional IT, network, security, and data.
Jeanna, my understanding is that it not only is a startup business, but it's in a different city, and it's tasked with really being very innovative in looking for new ideas. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, and I have that just a little bit later, but it is absolutely, because that was an important point around how to make this work, was putting it in a different city, moving to where the talent is, and yes, its specific task is the innovation. It's to come up with ideas, it's to test them, it's to fail fast. Fail fast on a small number of people if failure is going to happen, and then move it on if it doesn't.
And so, as we look at that incubator, it's got a number of capabilities / units or subunits, or at least expertises that comprise it, and it's pretty self-contained with respect to its own experimentation, other than drawing on the platform organization for some IT support. Is that correct?
It does, yes. Has its own marketing, its own product group, its own markets, really. I mean, it's a subset of markets, and its own operations. So yes, it's drawing on the mothership, for all of the platform and technology, but otherwise it is largely self-contained in the test and learn as well, and has its own board to direct the investment as well. Its own board, that BOD, its own board of directors, and then we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but there's also the portfolio management, so connected into that, but it's definitely designed as a startup.
Okay, thanks.
So the incubator, as we just said, is totally new work. That's a startup business, and the platform, this is a blow up of the center of the previous illustration, is bringing together the existing work. So to reach the initial change impact and selection of leaders, which was first round of design, the existing digital product and platform work that I talked about, we had pockets in different places, was realigned, and expectations for existing work and partnerships and portfolio was redefined and realigned to reflect digital products. Now, essentially what this is getting away from traditional linear vendor management, where you just select and pick and choose and manage, and into networks of systems and companies. And portfolio management, I think, can be looked at as an addition or extension to annual budgeting, because digital product cycles may or may not conform to budget calendars, and investment may or may not be confined to a single business unit. So this new organization is very basic and top line for the design of the existing work that's realigned to the new platform unit. And now I want to go, any other questions on that? Otherwise, I want to divert for a minute to talk about the point Sue just raised around the space and the city, and then a couple other supporting concepts that were critical in moving this along.
Jeanna, there is a question in the chat box, and it has to do with the geographical dispersion of this, and is Humana overall pretty geographically dispersed?
Yes. Okay. So for some reason, I can't see the geographic question. I do see the one about linear change. So geographically, yes, Humana is a national company and is in every market and in many states for Medicaid. And so so when we talked about markets, it's choosing different markets to do different things. If that clarifies that question. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then the other one was linear changed exponential. So the linear, now when I said linear, what I meant was in terms of a pretty solid process. There's an input, there's a bunch of activity, and then there's an output, and then maybe you'd repeat it. And so the change that has to happen in third-party management is more of a network and a connection to value. So it may be that same process, but it has to repeat more quickly, and it has to be repeated by more people. So that's what I meant by the specific change in third party and how that has to work, and laying the groundwork for that. That it started, but it definitely is still a work in progress. Okay.
There's one more question, but I think we can wait for that because I think you're going to get to it later. Okay.
Okay. All right, perfect. Okay, so I want to divert for a minute to talk about three key supporting concepts around this change, and then we'll go back to the design process. The first is what Sue raised around the importance of space and systems. I think it's very common to get new space for new business units. What became clear in this work, in this process, is that there is, or there should be, a journey to using space to contribute to working differently. So at Humana, very good work had been done around cloud migration, which is the basis for the technology, all the tools that enables, agile work methods, and there I'm referring to approaches, not agile organizations, which is related to execution. Also very good work in flexible work styles, and this foundation was critical and helpful to be able to set up new business units in an entirely new city with a new brand. So the basis for the city, the selection, was the ability to access the needed talent in the talent ecosystem, and having that foundation was a great option for a business to be able to be able to make that happen. So that whole sequence provides a better place from which to evolve how we work in working differently. It also reinforces the point that this is not business as usual. Second thing, oh, go ahead. Anything? Okay. All right. So the second concept, if you look at other startups and agility, they all evolved similarly to this example from Spotify. So they started informally 2012 with teams, and then 2018 having to do what you have to do to grow. They had to add governance. They had to have a way to deliver initiatives over multiple products and have shared services. So in a digital product context, this will be a portfolio informed by a product taxonomy that's delivered by teams. So these elements, the elements that may be different for most or probably the majority of organization are two things in the experience so far. Architectures, where they've been applied in businesses, seem to emphasize the needs of operators and technology people and how existing systems work. A digital product architecture should rather focus on the value or the value streams, the network we just talked about, versus things that are more linear. The other thing that is likely different is directional. So in this model, information is coming up and in from the incubator and the platforms, and so decisions are likely to be as much or more around adapting to what you've seen and what you've learned than directing. So this is a totally different leadership style and different skills. And then the last point on changing how we work, and then we'll go back to design. We're working on the network organization. So the horizontal, the initiatives, the projects, the cross-functional product or service delivery across the underlying hierarchical organization. And we've applied two communities of practice. So one is focused on agile elements, and the other is focused on product. The agile community is defining use cases and practicing delivery. The product community is topic focused and working on a framework for delivery of products and how they connect. So other topics are likely going to include eventually job definition, development and learning, and those sort of things. Known challenges with these communities as an organizational form are engagement and continuing to drive them. So we're trying to mitigate that by being very tactical and finding practical applications, like I said, actually practicing. And so we've been off to a good start with those.
So Jeanna, are you describing here the way the incubator's working, and then the idea is to use the incubator itself as an experiment in new ways of working that might eventually show up in the core businesses? Am I understanding that right?
Yes, and exactly what you said. So the idea is that the incubator, the new units are working differently, and we've got to bring that to the whole organization. So we've got the communities of practice, which involve everybody, the whole organization, literally the whole organization, to be able to work on these things in practice and move things along. And so we think the third point that we think that this is critical. So we're trying to stay pretty focused on these.
Got it.
So now we'll go back to design and evolution. So we had with the two units in place and the top line and the criteria around leadership. So we continue to iterate. We're working core elements and continue to make changes. And we're literally practicing innovation for the innovation organization with this approach. So you could think of it as a minimum viable organization along the lines of a minimum viable product or MVP. So the key shifts, 4 things there. One is having principles around the process versus the design. We did that already. We talked about that earlier. earlier. So that we're going to co-create, that we're going to experiment, we're going to be fair and transparent. Support and feedback from these communities of practice. As Chris just clarified, these are designed to connect the whole organization. The other thing is breaking that strategy down into OKRs, or objectives and key results and use cases, and organizing around those. And then the last is embedding the cultural change expectations in every bit of the work, that we have to work differently. So at this point, these iterations, back to where Sue started, we're still iterating across the STAR, as you might expect, the basic work, shared services definition, common systems and tools. And as we continue, then now we're moving into the taxonomy, the talent investment in microstructures like job families and things like that. So back on the divert for a minute for bringing on the changing how we work in the whole organization, and then we'll talk about talent and rewards. So same point we started with around the need to change the whole organization, along with adding new business units. Dropping in agile or product teams or both with no other changes seems to result in very little traction, or more likely a bunch of workarounds but not real change. So the agile or product team is successful, but the organization isn't truly transformed and not truly ambidextrous. I confirm the general pattern you're seeing here in leader distribution with contacts at other organizations of similar size, which is around 40 to 50,000 people. And as you can see, it's a diamond rather than a Christmas tree. So there's a large number of leaders in the middle. Without a clear rationale for why the extra layer is there and what decisions they're making. So the rationale for carving out a layer in leader space should be to add value to the work of the direct reports, which in turn adds value for the customers. And this is particularly important with this test and learn cycle, this feedback and learning cycle. So the model of promotion and oversight seems to be more often a tradition or rationale rather than growth. And the challenges here are that even highly competent people struggle to add value in cases where the work and decisions are duplicated and overlap. So we have to do some work around really sharpening up the criteria and the rationale for these layers to expect this model to work.
Jeanna, to go back to that one, this is the typical that you see. And do you think there's understanding in the organization that this distribution of leadership, the configuration of leadership in the organization is going to have to change? And is that part of that cycle of design that you drew earlier to really look at that?
It is growing. Yeah, nothing's ever perfect. So understanding,
is growing.
it is. The appreciation is growing, and yes, it is. So yeah, so the answer to the question is yes. Is it there? No, but the growing, yes. Is that definitely a higher level of awareness, and that things have to change around how it was the point around how the model actually works, that you have to be able to take the information up and adapt, as opposed to setting direction and pushing it down.
Right, and it seemed to me from your design model that what you're basically saying is you iterate with the implementation and development of the platform and the incorporation of that into the core. You're also going to be looking at the way the core does work, and that would include these leadership roles. At least I think that's what you said, you explained to me at one point. Is that correct?
That was a nice summary, yes. Yeah, that's exactly it. Revisiting the core, because if we're going to transform, if we're going to be ambidextrous and we're going to transform the core, we necessarily have to look at everything. And so this is where we need to start looking, because we know that we need the expansion of the leadership model. There'll always be a place for the traditional hierarchy where the most experienced person is the leader and oversight is needed. There also needs to be this extension or growth around being adaptable and connected.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, right? I think having looked at the deck before, but I'm seeing this slide now in a new way, and that is, this kind of represents, this is sort of for lack of a better term, this is the enemy, right? This is as digitalization takes over, as you begin to change the culture of the organization through the design. This is where hierarchy and traditional ways of thinking about leadership are sort of embedded. If you want to connect, if you will, the line between, in the STAR model, the line between people and structure, this is the challenge that we're going to have to face, and the problem we're going to have to solve if we want to move to more flexible, resilient, test and learn kinds of organizations, because this distribution is of responsibilities is probably pretty well embedded in people's minds.
Is that, and it's the way of working that it structures, right? Because it's again not clarity around decisions. Because if you don't know why you carved out the layer, then you don't have clarity on what decision space that leader has. And then the other thing is just the flow of information, because it goes up, over, and down. And then then the people that get these cascades have to figure out on the bottom how to connect, and all of that is very slow.
Good. No, good point. Yeah, and so now we're connecting the structure and the management processes in terms of decisions, and if we take out a layer, we have to account for who's going to make those decisions, where those decisions are going to get made.
Yes.
Very cool.
So, growing awareness on that and work. And then two other things along, directionally, because we talked about the design, and this has been months. So two other things around talent and rewards. So working with recruiting and how we hire to shape talent. So we talked about the need for different adaptive leadership model and the minimum viable organization design approach. So a talent shift logically follows. Again, back to our star. Critical things in this. The digital product discipline is maybe 15 years old, so there isn't an entirely standard set of jobs. And where they are standard, it's around software production. But as we said, this industry and others, are like cars are a really good example as well, are facing a totally different product. It's where the former product is part of a new product. So there's pockets of cohesion, but it's not entirely cohesive. So that's a different way of recruiting. And then you also have to look really hard at these promotions unless you perpetuate this model that we just talked about, which is going to slow things down. The need here is an extension of traditional leadership with fewer, better leaders that are excellent at connection and communication and adaptation, more so than being senior in the technical skill. And then the other thing is that it can be in conflict, obviously, to be iterative and agile and continue to separate strategy and execution. So it's the way that talent is developed that they need to have that visibility, and they need to be able to look across the whole thing. Everybody has to have a strategic element or strategic thinking or something in that background, even if you're an operator, so that you can see across the whole thing and be able to adapt quickly.
So you started talking about these being the skills, the talent paradigm shift, and you were focusing on the IT people, but you broadened that out as you continued to. It's really going to be a change in the skill set of almost everybody in the organization. New talent, new success language, new promotional criteria, et cetera.
That is my view. We're starting this, and we're new at this, and right now we're obviously in the technological piece. It's heavily weighted in that direction, but I believe that will be the case. That it extends to everybody around having to be more strategic, more systemic, and probably even a technology component. I think everyone will have to become a technologist to some level.
There's a question in the chat room that may relate to this, which was the person is guessing that there's a fair degree of policies and compliance elements in place in healthcare. I think that's probably true, as part of the traditional ways decisions are made. And so clearly that kind of deep expertise about policies and compliances and so forth needs to be somewhere embedded. How is that getting embedded in the incubator?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, you have to have that knowledge base, and that isn't going away. And so as far as talent and working this in the incubator, it is the balance of the talent that you get. So you want to, and that's the other thing that became clear in this process. I actually was going to talk about that as one of the lessons learned is how much balance matters, because this is a successful organization, and you want ambidexterity, and you want this dual transformation. However, you don't just start over completely new, because then you lose your organizational history. So that balance is very important. So there's quite a bit of talent in the incubator that has quite a deep background in healthcare. Is the short answer to your question. Long answer is balance.
Yeah,
finding the balance.
Yeah, because CMS isn't going to just say, "Oh, go ahead, Humana, do whatever you want." They have their ways of thinking about things, and they're probably watching what you're doing and wanting to know that their policies and their ways of interacting with them are not going to change, because they have to manage you and a whole set of other organizations.
That's correct. Yes. So balance is definitely the key. You definitely want to embed some of that, and then also just from a talent perspective, it's leveraging again successful people. I mean, we have to do new things, but these are smart and successful people that have been very successful at the previous model or the previous work. So one more point on rewards, and then we can go to discussion. So evolving that in order to get this work done, rewards will have to change as well. So I think this is true of all large organizations, especially, is that you tend to disproportionately reward leaders over collaborators. You know, we just talked about the having to be adaptable and having to connect and having to learn, and the rewards are skewed toward oversight and direction. So, and those rewards are deeply embedded. It's not just compensation, it's development opportunities, it's access to information and connections, it's space and other non-monetary perks, it's even the weight of their opinions. So, and then there's also, of course, this is well documented in many places, a conflict between rapid iterative product cycles and annual feedback, not to mention that most work is likely done out of the view of the domain leader that you're in. That would be providing the feedback. So slowly starting work on looking at that and what that needs to look like and how that needs to go differently.
And that would start out in the incubator, but probably then generalize to some changes that are throughout the core also. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Yes, starting the changes there, and then to the point about the healthcare policy and all that being deep. Same thing with the talent, talent and compensation policies. Those things are very deeply embedded as well. So have to work through that.
Yeah. So you're incubating that as well. Really interesting.
Incubating that as well. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, actually, you just inspired me. That's a way to think about that to keep moving this forward.
Oh.
So, will you say something?
I said, oh. Inspired.
Okay. Great idea. I'm inspired about those other things. Yeah. So when this opportunity came up, I searched on best practices for webinars, and it said that you have to end with a helpful checklist. So I said, Sue, I simply have to come up with a helpful checklist. So that's what we've got here. I also want to end with some of the wins. So this has been months. So there's nothing that is highly visible you'll read about on the news. You can find out about the new business units on the news, but not any great innovations yet. There are, as I mentioned, many products in place before we did this. Telehealth is there, remote monitoring is there, several mobile apps. However, they were, as we mentioned previously, somewhat cobbled together, and even in this short time, they're in a much more cohesive state. And the immediate focus is on foundational elements like infrastructure elements for platform and data, and how things are going to work in the cloud, and bringing tools and talent together. Expanding the platform to enable more partnerships. And so that foundational focus is really the win at this point. With hindsight, I can affirm many concepts you're well aware of. The going slow to go fast is much more productive. The block of time to reach the plan that I just covered with you in the top line for the new organization was about 6 times longer than the block of time spent to put it all in place. The other helpful thing there was having leaders aligned around the concept, the dual transformation, the need to be ambidextrous before moving on. And it also seems helpful to hit the point again when Sue asked about the talent, to really focus on some optimal balance between the old and the new. So again, it's a successful organization with a lot of great talent, so complete firewall didn't make any sense, but neither did a completely new set of people with no experience and no learnings to share. So the other thing, and I didn't talk about this as much in the transformation, but we took a people-first approach to assure them that we wanted to find a place for them, even if we don't know exactly what the place is, but, we want you on board. And so it worked out very well for the people who were optimistic, or at least cautiously optimistic, as we found our way through the iterative design process that we went into that I described. Definitely rip off the Band-Aid, putting all those business units together. It's better, the change is happening. It's better to just get it over with. And frankly, there were a few people caught up that probably shouldn't have, but that's okay. On the balance, it's better to make the change and maybe have a few stragglers that you have to work out later. It does show when you do that, it's not business as usual. And, again, you may as well just get it over with. And then lastly, the iterative approach. It's helpful once you've done a big change to slow the pace. However, we've sustained momentum by keeping all of these questions in front of people, and the communities are off to a good start as a reinforcing mechanism, as well as helping to aid design, because they inform the process around what's working and what isn't working. So I'll stop there. Chris, Sue, anything else that I missed or that you'd like to add?
There was one question in the chat room.
Questions, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, let's go through those.
It actually had to be in the incubation and innovation process. Are you collaborating with local innovation centers outside of Humana that often have multiple stakeholders, universities, hospitals, and so forth? Are you setting up ecosystem partnerships around the incubator or even around the transformation of the core?
Yes, that was part of the reason for selecting the location, was because of the ecosystem there. It's in Boston, and Boston has, in particular, a large network around specific to healthcare, innovation centers and that type of thing. So absolutely, and that's the reason that it's in Boston.
And I'll just make a comment and then turn it over to Chris, but I think you'll notice that we had a bunch of places where we talked with Jeanna about issues that we thought needed to be clarified. One of the things we are learning in our work with the companies that are going through the digital transformation is that when you get to the point of figuring out how all these neat, new, shiny objects actually fit into a business model and a way of going forward, it's so complicated. There's so much that has to be put on the same plate, and it's hard to keep it all straight. And we've done a lot of, with the companies we've been studying, just thinking through what are the elements of it. I think Jeanna has done a really nice job of cutting through it and saying, here's the major things that we've had to think about. And we know now that we have a huge iterative change in front of us, but we think we've got the pieces, the momentum, and the various elements to move forward, and if we can learn as we go. So let me turn it over to Chris, and Chris, your thoughts about how this fits into the larger picture of ambidexterity and innovation.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. One is, and I'm picking up on a question that was asked in the Q&A box. The notion of ambidexterity sets up the tension, and I think your slide here says plan for the conflict because it's there. So it's setting up the tension, the new and the core. And one of the questions in the chat box, which is going to be relevant to the whole thing, is as the incubator tries things out, does new things, tests and learn, eventually it's going to be the question of how do you move it over. And the specific question that goes back to one of the earlier slides is how do you think about changes in leadership? So the traditional organization has grown up with a traditional way of thinking about leadership, and the new talent, the new capabilities, the new competencies that you've been sort of describing. Have you guys given any thought to how that change in leadership behaviors, styles, competencies is going to migrate over to the core organization from the experiments in the incubator? Have you guys started thinking about that at all?
It's been given a lot of thought, however, due to time, frankly, at this point, not a lot of practice. So that was the reason for having the emphasis on the cultural change and taking, and there's some other principles that accompany, as I said, when we're going through the iterative design process, we have that set of cultural principles front and center every single time, and it addresses exactly that point. This is the way you need to lead. You need to be, and it's things that wouldn't surprise you. It's adopt a rookie mentality. It is, be open, be as transparent as possible, things like that. So yes, a great deal of thought has gone into it. We'll have to check back in a year or so and see how well all of it's working.
Yeah, no, and on that same point, right? Rob Cross and Michael Arena, and they've been thinking about how they use networks in doing different things. What was the thought process in terms of staffing the incubators? Did you pull people over from the traditional core Humana organization to staff that? Did you hire from outside? Was there a mix of that to try? How did you think about it?
Yeah, it's a mix, and not surprisingly, the leader is a veteran. So the president of the new unit is a veteran. Other than that, let's see, there might be, and then there's some seated in there. So the market people have some familiarity with Humana markets. The operations people have familiarity with Humana operations. The product people, I believe, are pretty much 100% new. If not 100%, it's close to 100%. So that balance, that's on the checklist here around that, finding that balance between the deep, which was to the earlier question around the deep industry knowledge and all the things you have to know, and then trying to bring in the new thinking and balance that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because you know, in the history of this sort of looking at ambidexterity, there's always the danger of bringing somebody from the core organization to run the new one, because then you might get, you know, the new organization might be designed with and to reflect the old organization. But in this case, it sounds like it's a really cool idea to bring somebody, the veteran, over who understands the business, understands the relationships with the regulators and the compliance issues and things like that, and bring in a bunch of new talent that recognizes, understands how to work in the new environment, different physical spaces, agile ways of working, and let that yeasty sort of environment work together to create that new system before and during while you're trying to move stuff back into the core. So it is an interesting sort of way of thinking about it.
And if I remember, Jeanna, one of the things you mentioned is that this organization's whole purpose, its product really is successful innovations being transferred into the core. And so those people, when they move over, are put into a very different space in terms of what they're expected to do, which should help, I think, with the combination of the old knowledge and the new knowledge.
Correct. Yes, the whole and the design, the whole new environment, the new office, the balance. My learning out of this, I mean, you can know that intellectually, you know, everything you just summarized, Chris, around you know, yes, you want the veteran knowledge and you want to balance that, but just how very, very important that is one of the things I learned out of this, because you reflect back, you've all led design projects where you go in with the team and then they write up on the board what they have already. You know, it's just very, very different for people to get right. Very, very, very hard for people to get out of their mindset. So if you can get just the right amount of new something in there, you know, new ideas or new people or whatever it is, then you can kind of break that pattern.
Yeah. No, nicely done.
There's also a question in the chat box about how you're communicating, sharing it, and actually getting people to understand the strategy and where things are moving. How deep are you going? How are you doing that? Just in general.
They have now the existing infrastructure. Now this is interesting. I'm hoping to hear from other people on how they do this. So there's a strong infrastructure around town halls and one-on-ones at Humana, and so it works through that, and then of course the regular team meetings, and then the networks, and then what we're doing is we're using the communities of practice to design networks to move that along. So we're adding in that whole network component. But otherwise, we're leveraging the existing infrastructure, which was, I think, pretty robust. And it seems to be working out well to make sure people are informed. This network thing, though, this is I think, new to everybody. So we're working along with that to to try to make that be more make that as robust as the other things, the town halls, the one-on-ones, and the other regular meetings and connection points.
And there was a specific. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's not like you're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There were some practices inside Humana that worked in terms of the town halls, the one-on-ones. These are good, solid practices that are going to work in the future as well as the past. And why reinvent the wheel? Why come up with a whole new set of things and dump all those new things on people when an existing set of systems will work? So I think that's the kind of thing that actually facilitates the transfer and the transformation of the organization when you decide on and understand in your diagnosis that there are some really cool things that we do, and we can use those to facilitate the transformation. I think that's an underestimated element in this movement, in digitalization and the transformation to agility.
And a related, on the checklist is a related issue, which I'm not sure you said explicitly, Jeanna, which was blur the change in communications disciplines. So maybe the change to the town halls is that communication and the change folk are hand in glove in terms of how you position things for the population of Humana.
Yes, I didn't specifically speak to that, but that was another key element in moving all this forward. Is the change people were literally right there. So the existing communications infrastructure was there, but we had the change people in there, bringing up points that they may have missed around, what's in it for me and how do I react. And we also did a lot of work that I didn't talk about, but a lot of work around resilience and kind of owning the process yourself and working on your brand. So we had that foundation as well, which was very important.
And one other question in the communities of practice was about the communities of practice was, are you using them to spot talent and to reward participation and to really build sort of a momentum around all of this?
Well, they're newer, but that's exactly as far as the spotting talent and reward participation, then yes, because what's going to happen is the people who participate are going to be the best connected. So that's going to move itself along. So there's nothing formal around that at this point, but you can already see that it has an impact as far as just what I talked about earlier, the access to information and knowing what's going on. They're better able to apply it and be more effective in their roles.
One other chat question was, do you have check-ins and how nimble and receptive is or was the core to multiple changes? And you've said you're really at the beginning of this, but that right now that platform organization is working on integrating and rolling an integrated view out into the business units. What's your sense of receptivity and whether they're going to get a lot of resistance? And do you have some successes there?
Well, it's it's timing. This is very new, and so right now they're very receptive, but they haven't been asked to significantly change anything yet. So the infrastructure is there. We planned for that. The infrastructure and people dedicated to working on adopting and changing as needed is there. So that's all there. It's built, but again, we haven't been through a significant change yet, so can't really answer that.
Okay. Well, I think our time is up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And thanks, Jeanna, to you and Chris and Alice for your help with this, and to all of you who attended. And hopefully we will see you again on future webinars and in other places.
Jeanna, thanks for that work. That was fantastic.
Thank you both. It was great to have the opportunity to discuss it and reflect.
Yeah. Cool.
Right.
Thanks to everybody for attending, and best of luck on the rest of your day. And as people get off, who need to get off, we are also staying on for those who want to have a deeper conversation.
And especially those of you who went through our certificate program, I would like to just chat about the issues you're facing with innovation, incubators, or other related topics of digitization. Okay. So.
Alice had a count on, I think, or had a list of who I think wanted to stay longer.
Yeah, okay. I think we're settling out at about 20 people still on the phone. A couple people are getting out. So why don't we start out just by, Alice, if you unmute people, perhaps they can share some of the things that are in their minds that they're dealing with that are related, and then we can just create a little agenda for ourselves to talk about. Alice? Is Alice there? Are people unmuted?
Yeah, looks like we're unmuted.
You've all been unmuted.
That's great. So
Sorry.
Does anybody just want to throw out an issue or two, or several of you, and then we'll just sort of regroup around those issues?
Yeah.
Well,
research studied from MIT says there's a number of issues with digital transformation. Number
and who
one
is this, please? Can you let us know who you are?
This is Chris Worley's devotee, Roland Sullivan from Pepperdine.
Ah, okay. All right.
Hi, Roland.
Hi. But the MIT research was done 5 years ago with 1,000 executives. It was repeated just a couple of months ago, and they still have the same issues. Number one, they cannot get the leadership group aligned. Number two, they have an inability to engage the rest of the organization in the implementation. Those are the two key things. And of course, my answer to that is you transform the top team the way Tony Petrella did it, and Peter Block did it, and Bob Tannenbaum did it, and Intensive, and you engage the people with a Dana Miller large group interactive process. And they don't do either of those. And so 70% MIT says the digital transformation is failing.
Okay.
So any other thoughts? Because that's one obvious one we can play with in terms of leadership.
My thought is the problem's right there. It's the whole organization around the leadership not aligning, and entirely expected, because again, not having the decision space. What do they decide? So I think that it's getting back to the rest of the organization, and I think you're right, Roland. I think there have to be some changes. I mean, some of these people need to not be leaders, and some of the leadership needs to change out completely. On that other point around inability to engage in implementation, that is exactly what we're trying to fix by putting a whole structure in the core. There's a vice president whose task is simply that, to figure out how to bring these products in. That won't fix everything, but it will fix. It should mitigate some of it. We'll see how that works out.
That's all happening down in the core. So as they go through that process, they're both engaging, learning, and hopefully feeling some success and satisfaction from it.
Yes. The key thing there is going to be around the funding model. I mean, who takes the hit if it doesn't work? And so we're putting a lot of attention into how that, where that's going to happen and figure that out around the portfolio design and the taxonomy design to try to mitigate that problem or eliminate it entirely, even better.
Would like to talk about it. What is on other people's minds, or what issues are you facing? Nobody else?
Hey, it's Dawn Newman.
Hi, Dawn.
Hi, Dawn.
Hi, and so just an overall, maybe something to highlight a little more is how are HR and finance and IT kind of helping to align everyone?
The functional role. Okay. We'll get to that.
Highlight that more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah. Any other things people are thinking about?
Okay. I'd be interested if on the transforming the top team, Jeanna has, she stated that they need to do that. You also, in your slide that had the arrow that showed what you did ahead of time, you really went to great depths and lengths to get people at the top team to have a formative role in how this unfolded, right up to what should be its purpose, what should be the organizational top. You called it the top line, but it's really these two new units, and get that defined and what they were going to do. And you said it was a series of iterative meetings. Is your sense that that is continuing, that kind of reflection, and that they're continuing to take responsibility for this, and they're continuing to really reflect on the fact that this is going to have implications for all of the people on that team who run businesses? And to your point, the funding model is really critical in this. Is your sense that they're continuing to work those issues, or are they going to hit a brick wall?
Yeah, no, it is, but again, everything is always arranged. So this actually answers Dawn's question as well. So in IT, for example, transformation underway there to become IT as a platform. So that is very basically getting out of the application business. The applications are giving way to the platform, and then IT becomes a platform that you use to run your platform business, your little micro organization on. So that's moving along. So that's very positive. Then, on the other hand, you look at the traditional products, and there's pockets where it seems like there's optimism and high engagement. It's like, what do we change to? Because we haven't gotten that far yet. Everything is, we're working on foundational elements and bringing these things together and getting ready. And so people have ideas, but just not exactly what it means yet. So the answer to what you said is absolutely. There's some varying degrees of acceptance. But then I got to say, in fairness, we don't have anybody who's really digging their heels in. It's just maybe not knowing what to do.
Yeah, and you implied when you talked about talent and rewards that you're beginning to grapple with that as an organization. I think I remember that HR didn't charge off and lead that. You had to actually do things to make them aware that they needed to rethink these elements. And they're starting to do that and take responsibility for it, or what have you tried and what seems to be working, or is this an area where we really could get some help from the people who are on the call?
That would be another. We could actually get some help if anybody has moved these things. That's the area that is moving more slowly, and so around the talent. So what I've tried, two things. One is along the talent. So getting involved in the actual job families, the job descriptions, who they're recruiting for, why, influencing that. So connecting that together with input from the new people. So I'm using the community of practice to get input. Here's our hiring problems. Here's this and that. So I've got that loop going with the talent people. Then on the rewards people, same thing with problems and compensation in different areas of the country, and what I said before around there not really being a standard job. Like you say product manager, and there's pockets of Silicon Valley or wherever, or Amazon. There's pockets here and there where that means something. There's other, the rest of the time it doesn't. It means many different things. So the compensation varies widely. So same thing, trying to organically get information back from the people on the ground, the problems they're having hiring and staffing, and then also, point out specifically in the system where things need to change. So the job descriptions are one example. The rewards packages are another example, that kind of thing. That is moving most slowly of everything, however.
And is that you're trying to do that from within, or has HR stepped up to the plate and understands it's their responsibility to figure this out?
Yeah, good question. Good question. I think that's really important, right? So I think the danger is that unless the HR and reward folks and the talent folks are involved in the transformation themselves, and I think one of your slides was to watch and listen to the people doing the work. If they don't do that, they may come in. We had the conversation about bringing in a veteran to run the incubator. If we let traditional HR come in and look at the work, they're going to want to create, what's the job description, what's the reward package, and they're going to use all their old thinking and old models to sort of explain the work that they're seeing, instead of maybe reinventing those things and saying, why do we need job descriptions in a world where everybody's moving around across all these different pieces of work, activities and functions and cross-functional teams? So I think that's a really good point about, are they stepping up to the plate, or are they just going to come in and use their old models and apply them to the new way of working?
And say thank you very much for the advice, but this is what we're doing because it's just what we do in the company.
That's a good point, and it remains to be seen. So I think we've got some stepping up to the plate on things to change. I don't believe we've got stepping up to the plate on total transformation. That has to come along. I don't believe we've got that at all. And then to some extent that gets in this. I'm sure this happens everywhere. You've got immediate needs. People need to hire people and they need to move on. So you're using the infrastructure you have to just be able to get through the problem. So half of what you have. So.
Because I think
Jeanna, can I ask a question? This is Velma. Was HR a part of the initial planning and design of this program? Because what
Yes.
I've learned in a lot of cases is sometimes if they're not and they're brought in at the last part and they don't have the full picture as to where we're trying to go. So were they a part of the design of this whole program?
Yes, whole thing, HR, finance, and IT, all with the business every step of the way.
Executive team, right? That
Yes,
charted
exactly.
the course.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And at lower levels as well. You know, as we work through the details, the same thing, finance partner, IT, HR, all the way through.
Have any of
Okay,
you
so
who are on the phone had used some approaches that have helped with this issue of how you get HR or other functions to really question their paradigm and try something very new that fits with the digital technology and the new work model?
Well, the only thing I have is in Practicing OD Edition 4, Bill Rothwell writes about HR from Penn State, and David Jamison writes about OD. And they talk about how the two must collaborate, and as they say, they are different roles. HR is not facilitative. HR has the talent and so forth, so they need to get themselves together and do what's best together for the system.
Yeah. Yes, and I think this scholarly work has pointed this out. I'm looking for actual approaches that are helping because we just spent a lot of time with these companies that are trying to make this transition, and it's really unclear to me at whether any of them are saying it's going to look different and we HR have to lead the process of figuring out how.
Mm-hmm.
And
well,
the
answer I have for examples I have is that when I do the design team through a 2.5-day transformation experience with Kathy Dannemiller, I have an HR person on the design team, and of course we have an OD person on the design team. And they work out their oneness, their transformation, in 5 days before we go into the big meeting.
Roland, we're talking about process. You're talking about the process. And
yeah.
what I think is missing here is, does anybody have any examples of a solution that came out of that process that seems to be working or has the characteristics of some newness?
And the solution would have to include the kind of things that Jeanna had. You can go to those, Jeanna, on your talent and your rewards that are really quite different than any status quo that especially large companies likely to have started out with.
Well, my answer to that is the behavior of the HR person, the behavior of the OD person is different in the large group because of the 5 days they went together to get themselves aligned.
Well, yeah, I think that process we would all agree on, and I think it's also what Jeanna has been trying to do. I'm wondering what gets them past that to, a year from now, it'll be very different what the HR practices are and what the reward and talent practices are. And HR will actually be managing a transformation, not in the HR function, which every HR organization loves to do, is reorganize themselves, but in the HR processes and the management of human beings in the organization.
Absolutely. And where that happens is after the Dannemiller 2.5-day, not 1 day. Kathy says you cannot get transformation in 1 day. Marv Weisberg agrees the same thing. You got to sleep on the day to 2 nights. And so when the implementation occurs, after the consultants have all left, the HR people get in there and they experiment and they innovate and they try new things.
And
so
let's see if any of the companies who are on the line have actually seen that happen and what the issues were as they did it. That's, I think, the question I'm asking.
Yeah.
Not what they should do, but who's seen it actually happen and this kind of transformation.
I've seen it happen. I see it happen all the time.
So I'll offer also, maybe one suggestion or success story inside an organization is when you have a strong leadership team, even at a program level, where HR has a role in that, in the transformation. You know, a lot of it, I think, is driven by the leader and the culture they're creating within that team. And so some of the things you're talking about is helping the HR person or the quality person or the operations person get familiar with the language of what Jeanna had talked about. You know, it's really understanding the language and how this really is systems thinking, so you can bring your own functional excellence to it, and it results in operational excellence. So I think it all gets back to that leadership team and having HR step up and take a role in it, rather than thinking of HR transformation as a new system from an IT perspective.
Absolutely.
You just made an excellent point. Yeah, you just made an excellent point, and it was in the language, because that's where I am right now, is just trying to, you know, like I said, trying to get it's the existing infrastructure, absolutely, job descriptions and so on and so forth. But I've gotten to where we at least have awareness that this is different, and so I think everything has to start there. That this is going to be different, and we have to do different things. So we're just at that point. But what you just said is great validation. Thank you.
So I think that what we're finding is it's pretty easy to agree in conversations that these things, for instance, need to be rewarded. But in actually changing fundamentally processes and systems that reflect deep historical beliefs and maybe even best practice in the function of HR involves a learning process and almost an aha process, and how to get that to happen, and to get HR to go from non-risk taking to risk taking, or finance. I think you're going to run into the same thing in your budgeting process. That as soon as you say that proof will be in the pudding of when you have these innovations and you need to now implement them in the core, who pays for that? Where does the budget go, right? And you know that's gonna really question some deep-seated assumptions about finance and budget, and the finance people are going to have to deal with a lot of ambiguity around that and figure out a way to actually incent it to happen through their measurement process and the reward process, and getting people to the point where they, instead of becoming the keepers of the status quo and the order of the organization, are the keepers of the innovation and change process to a much greater extent. And I guess the process of that, to me, go well beyond meeting and agreeing and into their own test and learn process through time, and it's a systemic one. I'm just wondering if anybody has gotten to that point.
Well, I agree with you.
Dan,
go ahead.
Dan talked about it. Yeah, Dan talked about it a little bit in the Q&As. That HR has to have their own transformation and chartering projects and visibility and accountability to senior. And I think he makes a good point. The systems are built for the hierarchy, and so all of this new way of working is going to have to proceed in a learning way in order to challenge all those assumptions that are sitting there in the hierarchy. So I think it's a really good point about pulling that, understanding what you're up against as you're moving these systems.
Right. Well, that's for us. And then for them, I think it's how do they actually get disconfirming information that would cause, people in HR or IT or us to change what we assume to be true about how organizations operate. And I like Jeanna's approach, which is set up some communities of practice. Don't rely on the leadership of HR to generate the disconfirming evidence. Have it come from within the organization.
Right, and for me, in my third phase of whole system transformation, we gather for 5 days an assessment of the entire process. Now, the results should be so exponential that the CEO of the organization has no question about measurement or profitability or results. They should be extraordinary. And if that be the case, then I believe the team themselves decide, yes, let's do this a second year. And as Kathy Dannemiller says in the Marriott model, it takes 3 years for a system to go through this before they can begin to sustain it, because that's, I believe, what we're all after. Get the consultants out of there. And so if they can contain this process like Airbus does, on their own forever and ever. And they keep learning and learning and learning.
So another question that came up early when we had people talking about the things that were on their mind was the transformation of the top team and the engaging of the rest of the organization. So it's both the top and the bottom. Have any of you got questions and or experiences relevant to that you'd like to share with the others on the line?
I have an experience that transforms the top team that Bob Dannenbaum, Tony Petrella, and Peter Block and I created at Pepperdine. I haven't changed it since 1979 because it always works. And it's a basic 2.5-day team building experience. I have it on the web. Anybody can learn it. There's not one of you that in OD doesn't know any one part of that. But
could we hear from some of the people who are actually in companies about what they've done in their companies? Because I think the textbook information is interesting, but I think the reason that we're talking to each other is to learn from what's going on in each other's companies. Nope. Well, then maybe we need to keep with the textbook.
I mean, my examples would relate back to not a company I'm currently with, but I think giving teams a venue where they can present and share what works, particularly in the digital space. So whether it's a community of practice or it could be a lean team. Sometimes they go by different names, but sharing how they used, how they were accountable for the results, and how they're continuing to learn and experiment. I think those are great venues. I mean, you could call it Team Appreciation Day or whatever. I've seen that, used very effectively, and then having the leadership teams promote that, promote it, and ask for more teams to share information across. So it gets back to the knowledge sharing. How are you capturing these success stories and then replicating them?
Great idea.
And I can validate that. I can validate that because that's how we started the iterative design process that I talked about. That's how we started it, was with exactly that, highlighting teams. This is our key accomplishments last year. This is what we have, and we've kept up the practice. It's narrowed, and then so the first part was the teams. The second part was then the talent. This is key talent. These are people we need to work with and develop so that everybody was aware of those people. And then we still keep up the practice with accomplishments and what you just said, that seems to work really well.
Yeah, and there's a comment on the chat box. It might be actually the comment about the teams and giving them visibility and really having them be the propeller and the catalyst for learning across the organization and for spotlighting what's expected in the future is a really important one. Another one that's on the chat box is the comment is, rather than spending money on engagement surveys, why don't we figure out how to get teams to test and learn and spend money for that purpose, which I think really points to a lot of stuff, is people learn this stuff by doing it. And that is really coming out of our digital work, is people can't learn about what the new organization has to be. They have to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an interesting... Right. Yeah, it's an interesting point, kind of between the textbook and the reality in the organizations is the observations that we're having about these companies that are going through digital. The notion being that the digital initiatives get started and they have some success, and in terms of scaling them up or spreading them and diffusing them throughout the organization, they sort of run into the hierarchy and the traditional ways of working. So the transformation then sort of gets stuck because people look up to the top and they say, well, the top should be telling us what to do. And the transformation at the top, it has to become a both and, right? They need the top doesn't know what the new organization needs to look like, neither does the bottom, and there has to be this engagement of action in actually changing the way work gets done and watching what happens and responding to that in both a bottom and a top kind of way.
And learning how to, adding on to that with the leadership, is learning how to work differently, because people have spent their entire careers, what you just said, waiting for direction, and then they go out and connect things. And this bringing information back is a different. That I think is the critical. I think what we'll say. Yeah, it's a different thing, and I think that's the most critical thing is the retraining yourself to bring the information back and the implications.
Mm-hmm. So the comment about don't do engagement surveys, do test and learn. We ought to add to that, test and learn and disseminate the learnings through the organization. Bring it back. If you're testing and learning and no one knows about it, then the organization isn't learning. That learning process is probably a critical piece of all this, and getting that accelerated.
Yes, how to apply it, and that'll be an interesting challenge for us, because, as I said, it hasn't needed to be a learning organization. Frankly, everything you needed to learn was in the data. So now it's not.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's in data, but different data. Yeah.
And then the other issue for your organization, for any distributed organization, is that the testing and learning is going on all over the country. And how do you make sure that learning and that sharing happens when the testing and learning is virtual and distributed?
Yes.
Yeah, and tapping into all that. Yeah.
I guess something that we could judge from that is that as your incubator tests and learns, how do you know that what they learn is going to be even compelling to the students?
Right.
Don't involve them in the testing and learning process.
I think that can definitely be a next horizon is this whole learning how this goes. It's honestly too soon to tell. I mean, awareness of the need is there, but and I'd love to hear about, and I will be looking at other companies who do this really well.
Yeah. Hi, Jeanna. It's Tanya Wilson. How are you? Great job with the work you've been doing.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, so it's interesting as I think about this whole sense of how do you get the learning out, which is a challenge, I think, for most organizations, especially where you've got such complexity in the current structures. Just really, are you looking at some type of a reintegration of the talent that's currently in the incubators back into the core for cross-pollination so that you have an opportunity to bring those learnings back and figure out how to operationalize them?
Well, in a more abstract way. So what we're doing is we have that other arm around what I'll call optimization, around looking at the layers and the leaders and everything in the organization. And so one of the metrics around that is movement in the organization, and not just up, because that's very common. That's part of the challenge is the promotion. So we're looking at movement across job families, which is not exact, but it's approximate. And that went up exponentially in the last year. So that's very encouraging. So the answer to your question is yes, but not specifically at that level. We're still at abstract. I don't know if we need to go to that level. Maybe if we have an organization where movement is encouraged, accepted, expected, that might actually take care of that. We'll see. But for now, we're a level above that.
But the encouraging thing is that Humana is really thinking very analytically about this, about what has to change in the operating principles of the organization all the way around that star. And that is really going to be helpful to you moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
agreed.
I hope so.
Agreed.
Yeah. So one of the things I was thinking about was
you're set up to learn. Yeah.
I was thinking about the use of networks, which we've seen to be effective at kind of a grassroots level, creating those networks and maybe even integrating some of the hypos that are within the business that have been identified as top talent, and using them to help kind of evangelize, if I can say that, spread the message about some of the work that's being done and some of the lessons that are learned and how effective that could be in taking those messages back into core.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're right. Yeah, growth of a network, that's a good point. So I'll keep going down that path.
Well, our time has come, and we thank all of you who stayed on the line to be part of this conversation. Hopefully it was useful. And
absolutely.
It's a model we are probably going to try to use in the future. And thank you, Jeanna, in particular, for pulling this together.
Nicely done.
Really wonderful watching as you were going through the design of this, and that you're sharing it with all of our constituency we're really thankful to you for that. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay. Have a
Thanks,
good rest
everybody.
of your day, everybody.
Enjoy
Bye.
your day. Yep.
Yep.
Thanks.
Bye.